One of the easiest ways to upset your children is to ask them a really well-placed question. I'm sure this works with other people as well, but I've had a lot of experience in recent years employing this tactic on my beloved children. They'll be going on and on about how their grade on a project is unfair, and then I'll ask them, "Can I see the assignments, instructions for the assignment, please?" Or they'll tell me that they've been too busy to clean their room, and I'll ask them, "How much TV did you watch this morning?" Let me tell you, little, well-placed questions like these are a surefire way to win the argument and a surefire way to make your kids really mad in the process. Because what you're doing in that moment is you're exposing the scramble that's underneath. The person is already feeling bad about a grade or a room that's still not clean, and so they're making excuses and trying to protect themselves. And I think this is exactly what's happening with the disciples in the gospel passage this morning. A woman comes into the room where Jesus is sitting, and she brings with her an alabaster jar, likely a family heirloom. And this priceless jar is filled with very expensive perfume, and without hesitation, she breaks it open and pours it on Jesus. It's an action that is so bold and unexpected and extravagant that it unsettles the entire household. And so you can start to understand why the disciples respond so defensively. "Why this waste?" they say. "This could have been sold and the money could have been given to the poor." And honestly, doesn't that seem like a really good point? That sounds so reasonable and responsible. Yeah, sell the priceless heirloom and the extremely expensive perfume and use the proceeds to help people. Isn't that what Jesus is all about? I think, though, that the disciples are just acting like my kids when they're trying to cover for a bad project grade or a messy room. The disciples see this woman's extravagant gift and they start to worry that they haven't loved Jesus enough. Maybe they aren't the good disciples that they always thought that they were. And so, what do you do in a moment like this when you feel exposed? Well, the disciples try to grab the moral high ground and turn it into a debate that they can win. "This could have been given to the poor," they say. And don't we see this all the time in our world? There's this new brand of argument called whataboutism. You can turn on any cable news show, I don't care what network, and you'll see all sorts of politicians and news anchors defending their insecurity by simply changing the subject. "Why are you proposing cutting the funding for working families, Mr. Senator? Whoa, what about the other party wasting taxpayer dollars on bureaucracy?" It happens all the time. When people feel trapped or inadequate or caught, they try to shift the story. "Yeah, but what about them?" And even if you're making a really good point, you're still not answering the question. Or in the case of the disciples, you're not confronting your own inner struggle. We all get caught in moments like these. Whether it's a parent calling out our white lies, or a coworker questioning our leadership, or a spouse frustrated by our choices, it's so easy to deflect or change the subject or try to take back the virtue podium. Which is why I think this gospel lesson is so unsettling. Because the disciples are us. They are doing what we all do when we feel like we're losing, when we feel like we're not enough. And that really is the question. that haunts so much of our life, isn't it? Am I enough? Am I on the right side of this debate? Am I living the right way? Is my life adding up? Am I doing enough? You probably noticed on the cover of your bulletin this morning that word generosity. And I mean, honestly, thanks so much for sticking around after you saw that. But talking about generosity and stewardship inevitably forces us to ask these enough questions. Am I giving enough? We all know that the church depends on the generosity of its members, but we start to wonder what our individual role is in all of this. We look at the people who we know are giving more than us and we think, oh, if only I could be more faithful like them. Or we look at the people we know are giving less than us, even though they could be giving more, and we think they aren't as committed to their faith as I am. But do you see what's happening here? We live with this constant play-by-play running in our heads, that at one moment is picking up on all our inadequacies, and then the next moment is pointing out all the ways we're superior. I bet the disciples were feeling really good about themselves up until that woman walked in the door. Look at us. We're Jesus' inner circle hanging out here with the Son of God. Look at us. We've made it. But then the woman comes along and upends that narrative. And so the disciples have to try and claw back their superiority. And they do their whole, but what about the poor shtick? But what I want us to understand is that they say this because they're hurting so badly. To think that you're special, that you're enough in one moment, and then to have that seemingly wrenched away is a devastating experience. And it happens to all of us. The politicians with their whataboutism, it's because they're scared. My kids with their elaborate stories, it's because they're hurting. And you, with your defensive posturing, your constant deflecting, your endless self-justification, all of this is because we humans are constantly unsure if deep down inside we really are enough. When you understand the emotional heart of this gospel story like this, it makes Jesus' response to the whole ordeal so powerful. Jesus doesn't chastise the woman, nor does he ridicule his disciples for their moral grandstanding. Instead, he reveals the bigger picture, the way that he has planned to save us all from this anguish that is living right below the surface every day. Jesus says, "She has prepared me for burial." This isn't about the best possible use of resources and proving that we're responsible. No, what's happening here is bigger, Jesus says. I am going to the cross for you, and so you don't have to constantly be worrying about justifying and saving yourself. You don't have to manage your way into being enough. You don't have to win the argument or prove your worth, because I, Jesus says, am going to carry what you cannot. This is why Jesus is so affirming of the woman's actions, because he knows that the world will be saved by extravagant love, not careful management. Through the absurdity and the wastefulness of the cross, Christ saves us. Pure love, poured out in a shameful, tumultuous, undignified way. Nothing about this fits with the way we like to operate But that's why it has the power to break us out of this whole anxious project that we insist upon. Christ gives himself for us. And so all of our questions about, am I enough, cannot have the final word. It's not that the questions disappear, but rather Jesus just meets them with a deeper truth, with an extravagant love that can unmask our anxieties and hold us anyway. And that's where this all circles back to that parenting moment I told you about at the start. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is reveal the truth and finally set someone free. And so, while this is supposed to be a stewardship sermon, I'm not going to tell you how much you should be giving. I'm not going to parse the details and explain if a tithe is based on your gross income or your net income. Instead, I'm just going to remind us all of the truth that Jesus points to. He tells the disciples and he tells us, you're not saved by being right or responsible. You're not saved by giving more money. You're not saved by proving to everyone that you're the good one. You're saved by the one who goes to the cross and becomes the gift you cannot earn. And this truth is what frees us to give like the nameless woman in the story. We are free to give out of joy and as an act of worship and as a way of reflecting back to the world the extravagant love that Christ has already given to us. Amen.